Good morning, Georgia. It's a beautiful day here in the neighborhood. My name is Bill Baker. I'm with Firestorm, and we're located in beautiful, scenic Roswell. Today, we're discussing part of the Crisis Coach webinar series, the Containment Myth, Misinformation Magnets. This webinar is the fourth in the 2016 series of webinars presented in conjunction with the Georgia Independent School Association, and we're pleased to have you with us. We'd also be pleased if you could become our friend on Facebook. There we go. Thank you. Facebook, we're known as Firestorm Solutions. On Twitter, you can follow us at Firestorm Soul. There is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We'd like to remind you that the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion. And the work product we present must be read in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. In addition, do not interpret this information as legal advice or legal opinion. Firestorm is delighted to have the Georgia Independent School Association as our underwriter and host of this webinar series. If you want to watch previous webinars in this series, you can go to firestorm.com, and you can also register for future webinars. Our presenter today is going to be Blair Neville, and I'd like to say something about Jeff Jackson. Jeff Jackson, unfortunately, is not able to join us, but he is out assisting other schools in Georgia. We're delighted to have him as our sponsor and host. Blair, over to you, please, for the presentation.
Great, Bill. Thank you very much. And again, thank you to the Georgia Independent School Association for supporting this. I really appreciate the opportunity that they provide, and hopefully everyone will find this presentation beneficial today. And there's opportunity for questions, please let us know, and you can ask if there's things as we go through it. As I was putting together the presentation, I kind of thought back to a commercial that I had seen, and I'm sure most people as they go through it will be familiar with it, and it kind of was apropos when you think about what we're going to talk about today. And generally, if you think there's the commercial sets up with two people standing on a street corner, a young man and a young lady, and he asks her, just, where did you hear that? And her response is, well, I heard it on the internet. And he kind of furrows his brow and says, do you believe it? And of course she says, yes, I do. You can't put anything on the internet that's not true. His response is, well, where did you hear that? And she says, on the internet. And that's when the less than attractive French model walks up and says, bonjour. So we're not going to do the presentation in French today, but I think it really sort of strengthens the argument that that there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of information that unfortunately is half-truths, opinions masked as truths, and generally misinformation. And the thing about misinformation is it's a magnet for impacts, and those impacts can affect you directly. So we're going to talk about some of those impacts, how they affect you, what they can do. But more importantly, as we go through this, what I want to stress is, how do we put you back in control? First question is, are you in control? Or is the misinformation in control? And if so, how do you gain control? And more importantly, what can you do up front to allow you to avoid this? Because once the rumors get started, once the innuendo starts, once the information is out there, it is very, very difficult to bring it back. And there's a term we hear, if you've been on a webinar with Firestorm in the past, you might have heard us. If you're explaining, you're losing. The moment you have to try to explain yourself, then you're at a disadvantage. And that's what we want to try to avoid. We can't always avoid the misinformation. It will be there. The question is, how do we stay in control? And there's misinformation everywhere, regardless of proof. Rumors cling. I like to use the term sticky. They can be very sticky and hard to say they're not true. I picked a few of them here. I just did a web search as I was putting this together, and I thought the first one was kind of apropos given the election that's going on right now. And whether you're a fan or not, the fact that he has presented his birth certificate is proof that he is an American, and but still 1 in 5 Americans have a misperception, and it still exists, and it's hard to shake it. Jade Helm, for those of you who may not have been aware of that, was a military exercise in the West, huge military exercise. But if you do a Google search on that, you'll see lots of articles about martial law, about invasion, about governments trying to stop states from seceding. Very complex, and still people talk about it, and there's a great deal of information out there when it was a military exercise. And one in the Northeast here was a 1% tip on a $133 bill, which got great exposure, was all over the news, and just wasn't true. It didn't exist. It was not sure if it was a commentary that someone picked up or what actually happened, but the reality is that it was, again, a half-truth. And these things are a growing trend. This is the problem with it, is that everyone has a camera. As given schools, most of your students, except for the very young ones, have cameras. Our junior or reporters. When events happen, there's pictures being taken. It amazes me when you watch the news and you see events, see tragedies, and people have the wherewithal to pull their cameras out and start filming these things. It's just something that's with us all the time, and that information gets out. That information, those details, and those pictures get out into the blogosphere, and it's hard to bring them back. Once the cat's out of the bag, it's hard to get them back in. And the damage can be significant, and the damage really revolves around trust. And you have a brand as a school. You have a brand. Your parents and your families come to you because of an emotional tie. They look at you and your brand and what you deliver, and that really wraps around trust. And that trust is a backbone for your families, and it's a backbone for your success. And trust is so important. I grew up in a sales environment many years back, and we were always taught that people will not buy from people they don't like. People buy from people they like. And I kind of changed that, is that people buy from people they trust. If they don't like you, they probably will not buy or deal with you. If they like you, they may, but if they don't trust you, they won't. And that's really the key, is that emotion, and it is truly an emotion, needs to be managed and protected. And that's what's so critical about this. And that misinformation can deliver and can damage that trust. And little things, just little tidbits, can make it smaller and smaller. It's like an eraser. It's just a mistake. It disappears, and once it's gone, it's very, very hard to get back. And it's an attribute. That trust capital, as I call it, is truly an attribute in your business or your school. And your school is a business. And as I was putting this together, I looked at a few surveys, and there was one interesting one that was a denial of service, where customers were questioned about their provider having a denial of service. And the interesting were that that they felt that the customers felt that trust was the most damaged consequence. About 50% of those surveys said that the loss of trust from that impact was significant, followed by loss of revenue. So the loss of trust was even greater than the loss of revenue when it came to those events. And so it is really important, because if you've got good service, if you've got good quality products, if you've got an environment and an institution that people trust, they will come back, and there's an opportunity to repair it. But once you lose the trust because of rumors, mistruths, information that is half-truths, and your message doesn't clearly exonerate and remove those half-truths, it's hard to rebuild that trust. And therefore, protecting that brand is kind of what we want to talk about a little bit today. That intangible asset that you have in your name, in your reputation, needs to be protected. And protecting it and growing that trust is not just critical to the business in the sense of you have to have it. It also allows you to attract talent. If your reputation is strong, you have an opportunity for better talent. Maybe premium suppliers, your families, more families coming to you because of that trust factor and that reputation factor. It also is a competitive, sets up some competitive barriers because you're the more attractive choice. Without it, it's hard to rebuild it. And there's many reasons why it can be damaged. One of the big reasons, and one of the areas that we find that it is kind of lost for a lot of our clients, is that they're lost, and they're the last to know the information. There's barriers to collecting that data, and it's really critical because there's two situations that occur. One is there's misinformation about you. There's articles, there's details, there's commentary about you. How do you deal with it? Is one step number one. Well, if you don't know it's out there, you're not going to deal with it. Number two is that getting in front of that. So stopping it before it happens is one step. And if it happens, how do you get your hands around it? And the only way to do that is with intelligence. And if you see the banner here, intelligence is a little different than information. It's information plus insight. And the insight piece is context, it's experience, it's expertise. It's being able to take those factors, combining it with your information that you collect to put you in a position where you can make decisions. That's really the key. If there's barriers against that information, you're not going to be able to do it. If the information gets through without the insight, then you have the data, but it's very difficult to make good decisions with it. And you need this to protect the brand. You need to understand the source of that information. You need to understand, and then importantly, how to deal with it. So we need to break down some of those barriers so that you can get that information. And on top of that, you then need to be able to have insight, which we'll talk about that, so that you can make those decisions. Now, we've coined a phrase called visibility vulnerability. It's a mouthful, but really what it means is that your visibility within your community is twofold. One is it's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with visibility. You have marketing advantages. You advertise your schools. You want good visibility. You want people to look on your web pages and on your Facebook pages. You want people to receive your tweets about the good things in your environment. And that visibility is great. And as we said, that breaks down that wall. That allows you to communicate and allows people to communicate back to you. But at the same time, having that visibility puts a target out there. People then see you. They can respond to you both positively and negatively. So you have to be able to manage that process. If those negative comments and exposures start to rise, you have to be able to respond to them. First of all, you have to be able to see them. And you really want to avoid having to miss those and coming back later and say, why didn't we see those things? What's happening? The last thing you want to be doing is like the previous slide of, why didn't I know about this? So the visibility is like a scale, and you want to keep it balanced. And we can talk about some tools and things of the way to do it. And your failure to be able to see some of the risks, the exposures, and the threats can result in that brand and reputation damage, and again, coming back, that loss of trust, which I boiled it down to that term, is that's the key. that loss of trust. Because again, a brand can be damaged, and a brand later on afterwards can still have a great deal of power, and people can say, you still make a good product or you still provide a great service, but I don't trust you. I don't trust that it's going to continue that way. I don't trust that you've fixed the problems. At the point in time, you may have. So the trust keeps you away. So again, that to me is the key word. Everyone should be seeing on their screen a lot of dots. And again, if you kind of look in the middle of this chart, you're there. You're one of those dots. And you're just in the mix. You're part of the community, you're part of the environment, and that's fine. If a crisis occurs, if some event occurs, all of a sudden you become more visible. And you can see in this sea of dots how you stand out very quickly. And that visibility is not something you want. And there's a potential for that visibility to grow and maybe get out of control. If, number one, you have a program that can control it, if you can, as I say, get your hands around it, understand what's happening, see the leading indicators or red flags and be able to address them, then the dot kind of goes away. You're able to be in front of the problem, you're able to address it quickly, and you're able to address it to the right people at the right time with the right message. Again, it disappears. If not, it appears. And then it continues to grow, and you should see this dot growing. So if you're not getting to the right people, if you're communicating the wrong way, if you're communicating the wrong message, that dot grows, even though you think you might be doing a good job, and it can grow out of control. One of the things we'll talk about a little later in more detail, but this is an opportunity to say that the media is not the vehicle for you to communicate to. You have to do it directly. Your stakeholders are your families, your students, your employees, your board of trustees, your community as a whole. And those are your stakeholders. That's who you need to communicate the correct message to. Using the media is not a vehicle to do that. That doesn't mean that they're all bad and that you can't use them and you have to talk to them. You do, but at the right time with the right message. Because if they deliver the wrong message, you then are dealing with consequences from that message. You have to then pick up the ball and try to fix that problem. And again, they're not your enemy, they're not your fan. They're just reporting the news. And guess what? Bad news sells. Good news is not that attractive. So you're always having that risk that they're not the vehicle to communicate to your teachers and students and families. You have to do that directly. And in developing your messages, it's difficult. If you take a look at the chart, there's 3 sections on it. The first, the green one, what you know. That's the information you know. You have it, you know how to deal with it. Second one is what you don't know. Fairly straightforward. That's where you buy expertise. You need legal advice, you hire lawyers. If you need security advice and you don't know what to do, you hire security experts. Those are the things that you don't know, so you deal with them. The balance of the information is, I don't know what I don't know. And that's difficult because if the red flags start to appear there, if the leading indicators start to jump in that area, it's hard to respond to them. So our focus is, how do you collapse that? How do you bring that down? How do you make that just a little bit smaller so that when threats do appear in that part of that chart, you can get them? And that's where you come back to that information and insight. The data is there. You can pick up the data, but if you don't have the insight, it's hard to create the intelligence that you can then respond to or make decisions on. So how do you collapse that? How do you make that a little bit smaller? And really, it's kind of twofold. First of all is knowing what's out there. Having a predictive intelligence model, we call it predictive intelligence, in that we're collecting information, we understand what it is, we then put some insight around it, we have our intelligence piece to it. And really what it comes down to is using tools that are in the marketplace and expertise in the marketplace to collect data. Look at newsworthy events, look at the social media environment, but more importantly, you're collecting data around keywords and phrases, and collecting them, storing them, understanding them, so that you can create a baseline and say, this is the information that's out there today, this is what it's saying. And if there's an escalation of it, once you have the baseline, then you know something's going on. It doesn't necessarily mean it's right or wrong or misinformation or directed at you, but it allows you to take a look at it and then understand, what is this information? What's being said out there? What's happening? What are these red flags? And we've been involved with a number of institutions when it comes to violence on site, and one of the things that we've learned, and it's a fairly common data point out there, that in the case of violence at a school and or at a workplace, because we deal with both, is that about 80% of the time somebody knew something was going on. There was chatter, there was Facebooks, there was commentary, there was something in the community that said, we've seen this, we've heard these commentary, we've seen some indication of this that concerned us. And about 67% of the times, 2 or more people knew about the event or about the thought of the event. If that information's out there, why aren't we responding to it? Why aren't we collecting it? Why aren't we gathering it and then making choices and being able to respond to it? And that's that predictive intelligence model. You need to be able to understand what's being said out there, and then but more importantly, to be able to analyze it, have that baseline, so when it changes, when something is said, you can then respond to it. And part of this, I took the crisis out of this and put in consequence management, because so often we find that without that information, what we end up spending a lot of our time with is the consequence of decisions, not the crisis itself. And that's the piece you want to avoid, in that if something should happen, if there's an issue and you have to deal with it, then you don't want to create a bigger problem with your response. A couple of truisms: if there is a crisis or an event around your school or with your community or with your students, much of the information you collect probably in that 24-hour period is going to be wrong. And yet you're still going to have to make some decisions on it. And that's tough, because as a professional, you're trained to make decisions. You're trained to collect data on an environment, understand it, and make decisions on it. In this particular case, you're going to have to do that, go through that process. But sometimes the information may be wrong, or it may only be half the information. You're still expected to make some decisions. And a process to go through, and a process that can help you with that, and to help you avoid those dominoes coming down, is based on this model. It's called the OODA model, and a very simple model developed during the Korean War. And there was a Colonel Boyd who was a flyer, and he noticed that the American fighter pilots were much more successful than the Korean fighters. And he did some research as to why. And when he looked at the best of the best, they said it comes from the fact that we're making an observation, and we observed that the MiGs are just not as maneuverable as our planes, that they're not as capable as our aircraft. And when I make a change, they cannot respond, and that gives me an advantage and allows me to be superior in the air. They cannot respond as quickly. So the simple model was, we observed a fact that they weren't as maneuverable. We oriented ourselves to that fact, made a decision onto what we're going to do, and then we acted on it. And then we collected information, and we started all over again. And that's fundamentally what's below here, is understanding what's going on in the environment, taking the data that you have, taking the insight that you might have, and then making a decision or deciding to do something, acting on it, but more importantly, monitoring it, monitoring the process, adjusting, and then going back through the loop again. Because unfortunately, you're not going to have all the right data, and it's going to be a stressful situation. It's going to be an embarrassing situation maybe. But regardless of the case, following those simple steps allows you to make much better decisions, and allows you to avoid that getting into a consequence management model where you're having to deal with the dominoes falling down, and you can focus on the crisis or the event or the issue at hand. Again, a little more information in that, misinformation in that picture, but when you look at it, it sort of, you know, it's an example of what can be out there on the internet, and it puts you in a position of how do I protect or regain my trust? If I've got trust, how do I avoid having to go deal with it and having to try to defend it, which you don't want to do? Or if something happens, how do I regain it? And that's part of making the right decisions and making the decisions, and we just talked about a model to do that. How do you respond? What is the process you go through? And what are some of the things I can say and it can help me with that process? Well, in our model at Firestorm, we take a very simple three-step model in our communications process. Predict.Plan.Perform is something you'll hear us talk about often, and it's how we work through our engagements. And in particular case of crisis communication, first step is to predict who's your audience and what are their concerns. Who are you communicating to? In your case, your families, your community, your students. If you're involved with and associated with a church, its members, a board of directors or trustees that you have to deal with. Those are your audiences, and then tailoring the message, because each one of those audiences have different emotions, have different ways of looking at things, are looking for little bits of different information, and the message that's delivered to them has to be tailored to them, and the messenger has to be tailored to them. And again, I have media on here. I don't want to beat up on the media, but again, they're not typically your friend. They're not the medium that you would use to send that message. They are people you have to talk to. In an event of a crisis, you will have to deal with them, but at your time, in your place. And I'll give you a quick example, just to frame this, is that in the case of maybe a fire at a school, for example, or any event where first responders are there, if the media shows up, typically people will look to a headmaster, you know, a school security resource, or whoever is on site to say what's going on. At that point in time, the people in control of the environment are the first responders. They are in control. At that point in time, you really don't know what's happening. You think you know what's happening, but you're not sure. You don't have all the facts. For you to speak to the media and share that information is not going to help you. It's not the right thing to do. The answer to the questions are speak to the first responders. They're in control. They know the details. They have the information. I will, our school will, our headmaster will be back to you when we know the details. Our focus now is on the safety of our students, protecting our families, and that's where we need to be focused. And we will get you the information once we have it. Speak to the first responders. They're in control. That avoids miscommunication. It avoids saying the wrong thing. It puts the control back to you and the first responders, and it allows you to go back to your environment and deal with the crisis at hand. And it also avoids he's hiding or she's hiding something because they said no comment, or they didn't answer our questions, or they were evasive. So again, having a tailored message, a practice message, allows you to respond quickly and cogently, and then move on and back to what you need to be doing. And then finally, focus on three messages. We're very firm is that if you prepare your messages beforehand, you can then focus on those three messages, and the techniques and the technicalities can be tailored to the particular stakeholder, but the messages are the same. The messages, everyone who has to deliver them is singing off the same song sheet, and will deliver the same and cogent message to the right stakeholders. A process to go through there, again, very simple three-step process. Predict, plan, perform. Again, predict, understand the consequences that are happening, collect the data that you have at hand, and collect the information. And in doing that, note the facts. Note what's going on, time, source, verify. What's that information that's flowing in to you? And write it down, time, date stamp it, has it been verified? So that you know, is this a fact, is it a half a fact, is it someone's opinion, is it we think, we thought? That's good information to collect, but make sure you know what it is. And then set your priorities and your actions. Assign, follow up, who's going to talk to whom, find out, make sure they understand what they're going to say, make sure it's done, and again, back to that OODA model, monitor what was the response and can we improve it. And it's just that sort of feedback loop. And a few questions on the bottom here is that, what do you know? When you're going through this process, always ask these questions. What do you know? What's fact? What's fiction? What fiction may turn to fact. So it's good to collect it, but understand what it is and what category it falls under. Are you concerned about it? Yes, no. If you're not, then move on. If it's yes, then what about? What's your plan? How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to communicate it? How are you going to monitor it? And then who are you going to communicate to and how you're going to do that? So those questions, if you keep them on sort of the forefront of your process and continually walk through those questions, collect the information, allows you to respond quickly, allows you to make decisions, and allows you to make better decisions in a time when you may not have all the information and you're not 100% sure if it's correct. We've put together a kind of a communications commitment here, and this is something that you might take and put in your communications plan or put in even your handbook and say that from a communications point of view, in our responsibility as an institution to provide information to our students and parents, this is our commitment to them, and this is the way we'll follow our process. And very simply, the first sign, again, coming back to the media, communications with the media does not benefit any of your stakeholders. It's not a vehicle to use to communicate the information to them. They may have to be spoken to, they may have to, you have to deal with them eventually, but again, I reinforce, it's not the vehicle you use to communicate the data to those stakeholders. You need to do it directly. Communicate directly with them and not through the media. And directly being may not be one person. You may have one person responsible for each one of those areas because they're better equipped to do it. Communicate honestly, and it's very important that you stress that you're going to protect the information. In a time of crisis or an event and confusion, you have a lot of information, especially in today with cyber crimes and that being in the forefront of everyone's thought. Your commitment to protect that information. You cannot talk about your students. You cannot talk about your faculty, your staff. You cannot make comments about they did this, they did that, this was the event. It's just not something you're going to do. You're going to protect their identity. You're going to protect them as a group and not share that information to anybody. Communicate with the authorities directly. Again, your first responders are your best friend, and you need to work with them. And the schools that I work with personally, that I've dealt with in the past, seem to always have a great relationship with the local police and fire. And I would recommend that continues and you try to grow that relationship because they're going to be there. And if you have a good relationship, and you've collected the right information, you can share that with them. And again, this commitment and kind of rules of engagement for you is an continuous improvement process. As you get better, you'll tweak it. But I think it's a great guideline to say this is our baseline. This is the way we will communicate with our community, and these are the guidelines we'll use. And it's a commitment to, again, to your families, to your students, and again, it builds that trust that this is the way you do your business, and people can trust that you're going to adhere to these things. Training's key. Again, coming back to that fundamental question. If there's information out there, how do I stop it? If there's information, how do I stop it, and how do I get control of it? And what do I do to avoid it? And training your people on threatening behavior is key. These are the things that we see most often that we have to deal with or we're dealing with. And if you have an ability to report these things, have an opportunity that if these behaviors are evident in your school population, in your staff population, because it isn't always about the students. You have some schools have very large staff, in the community, that how do you report them? You have to have a mechanism so that you break down. If you remember back in the early part of the presentation, you want to break down that wall so that information flows to you. We see schools adopting anonymous reporting models. Some applications that your management applications have anonymous reporting models. That's great, but an anonymous reporting model can be something as simple as a suggestion box, and a way for a student to put a note in there that they have a concern, that one of their friends they feel is having problems, so that you can respond. If that information can flow from them to you when they see these behaviors, then you can address them early. That way you can avoid having to deal with the problem when it happens. You can stop it in the beginning. Again, behaviors of concern on the other side. Same messages. Are you training your people to look for these? Are your teachers and your staff aware of the leading indicators of these types of things? And then again, if they see them, if they notice these things and they have a concern, how do they report that information back to you as an administration to say, I've seen this, these are red flags, so that we can get out in front of this environment and address it early. And again, the last thing you want to do is you hope that you're not dealing with these things afterwards. You want to try to stop them beforehand. That intelligence network allows you to collect that information, so if you start to see these kinds of comments about these things on Facebook pages and websites and commentary from a student body, you can respond to them quickly. And it's getting to be, the information out there is there's so many vehicles. As I was putting together the presentation, I took a look at my son. I have one son in high school, and I looked at his high school. It's a fairly large high school, and there's more than 50. I think there's 51 or 52 clubs in the high school, and on top of that, there's probably less than a dozen sports organizations, both female and male: hockey, football, soccer, track. And I know he runs track, that they have a Facebook page, and they use it for communication. That's how they communicate with everyone. And I thought about it, and I realized that every school has a website, possibly a Facebook page, maybe a Twitter account. But you start to think of going to that next level of information, next level out of how many of your clubs and groups and student bodies and have Facebook pages and have websites, maybe have Twitter accounts that are used generally for communication, good things, nothing, that positive visibility that we said before, but it puts you in a position where you're looking at all of these pages and touch points, have your name on it. And again, that's where a lot of this information is. So how do you monitor and collect that? And these behaviors of concerns or these threatening behaviors, if you see them or your staff sees them or the teacher that's responsible for that group sees it on a Facebook page, do they have the mechanism to talk to you and bring that back and be able to respond to it quickly? How do they communicate back to you, and then how do you then communicate back to your community? And that's part of this training process. I showed this up here. I want to use it as an example of the way we create, and as I mentioned before, about having predetermined, what we call message maps, and having response protocols established. And this is where you would look and say that here are the steps to take. And I use this, very common: evacuation, lockdown, shelter in place. And you can see that what we've done for those events, we have an action, a condition, a directive. what will you do, and then, and what you would communicate, and then the action behind it. And building this type of model for, again, all of those behaviors that you saw on the previous slide is important. Now, you don't, in many of them, there might be the same directive and action, so it wouldn't have to be a lengthy list, but having the same kind of process of, if this event happens, if this behavior happens, what's the directive, and then what's the action that takes place. And it makes it clear that if a teacher, a student, and or a parent, and or a someone in the administration sees this, they then have the step process to go through. And again, allows you to be quick, cogent, and allows you to respond to the event. In that incident, this is typically when we see an incident happen, this is typically the process that goes through. And you can see the steps, who's going to be communicated to and how. Do you feel comfortable in your environment that those lines of communication in that previous slide, those actions items and those directives are all in place so that if an event happens or if those behaviors of concern are identified, that the flow moves through, and you can easily get through each one of those layers. That's that part of that crisis communication plan that needs to be in place. And then finally, one last comment is we put together a maturity matrix, and in that maturity matrix, on the left side of the graph are all the decision points, but I wanted to draw your attention to the communications effectiveness on the bottom. And this is a great tool to sit down with your crisis communication team, crisis response team, threat team, whatever you have in your environment, to say, where are we on this continuum? And you can see that in the first one, confused messages, maybe highly reactive, we don't know our channels well, we don't know who's going to respond to them. In that environment, communicating under that environment, you can see the type of miscommunication, you can see the type of confusion that may be created. Or as you move through the continuum to stage 4, I know my messaging, I prepared my messaging, I know my stakeholders, I know who's going to respond to them. All of a sudden, it just avoids confusion. So again, this is a great tool to look at and say, where are we and how do we get to the next step? And the next steps, again, predict, plan, perform, really come around with establishing an intelligence network, knowing the information that's out there, and being able to turn it into something you can make a decision on. Awareness and prevention training, those behaviors of concern, people know what they are so that they can communicate them back to you, and then you can respond to them quickly before they get out of hand. Security assessment is also great, both your grounds, your IT, and your communications. Are your communications lines established? Create a plan. Have a plan. Have a communications plan. It can be a separate plan, and have it with your predetermined messages and those protocols that I showed you before with those directives and action items. And train. One of the biggest things we find is that people sometimes put together great plans, they have good plans, but they don't train and they don't exercise. And that's an opportunity for disaster, because what happens is when the time comes you have to do it, you're not ready. Training shows you, and stressing the plan shows you where you need to maybe make improvements. Insurance is a big thing, especially around cyber today, and make sure that your response plans are up to date. And we do have on our website a behaviors of concern user group, which is a great place to get information, to see opinions, and as I said before, some of those red flags that one might look for. How do you identify them? How do you best communicate those concerns? And a great place, if you take a look at it on our website, a great feedback mechanism. And I would suggest you might want to join it or take a look at it. And finally, very simply, is we do have a brief, and the brief is on our website. Kind of summarizes what we went through here today and the talking points. And a great document. If you get it, download it, please send it to your community. Very comfortable with you sharing it with whoever you think you might want it. And again, definitely want to thank Georgia Independent School Association for their help and their support and their commitment to this, because this kind of information is critical for everyone. And you know, to take 45 minutes to go through with their support, it's great, and we do appreciate their support for us. And again, we want to get you out on time, and again, I appreciate all your interest. You have an 800 number there. If there's any questions, call the 800 number. My email is bneville@Firestorm. If you want some of the information or would like to brief, somebody will help you. We'll get the information to you. And more importantly, is if you want more details or want more information on some of these topics, I'm more than happy to talk to you about it. Bill, I don't know if there's any questions.
No, they're not. Thank you for your presentation today.
Oh, great. Thanks to everyone who came. And again, if there's anything we can help you with, please dial the 800 number, and we'll be more than happy to help. Have a great day. And that concludes the presentation.